Hello again. I want to read you a little bit more of the Great Cake Mystery. So remember, in the first two chapters, we met Precious Ramotswe, and she was listening to her father, Obed, tell her a story. And he began to realize that she noticed things, a lot of things, and she could also tell when people were making things up. And so he suggested that she might be a good detective. All right. Chapter 3. When her father said to her that one day she might become a detective, she thought at first, what a strange idea. But then she asked herself, why not? Yes, I could be a detective, Precious said, but surely it will be years and years until I get my first case. But she was wrong about that. A case came up sooner than she thought it would. Detectives say their first case is always the hardest. Well, Precious was not sure if that was true for her, but her first case certainly was not easy. This is what happened. The school Precious went to was on a hill. This meant that the children had a long climb in the mornings, but it was a wonderful place for lessons. Looking out the window, they could gaze out where the other little hills popped up right like rocks in a stream. And you could hear sounds from far away, the tinkling of cattle bells, the rumbling of thunder far off in the distance, the cry of a hawk soaring in the wind. Are those things that you hear at your school? It was, as you can imagine, a very happy school. The teachers were happy to be working in such a nice town. The children were happy to have such kind teachers who did not shout at them. And even the school cat, who had a comfortable den outside, was happy with the mice that could be chased. There's the cat. But then something happened. What happened was there was a thief. Now, most people don't steal things. Most people know that you should not take things that belong to others. For many of us, that is rule number one. Rule number one, don't help yourself to other people's things. Sticky pages. So, a thief. And a thief at school, too. So another word for a thief might be a robber or a burglar. Someone who steals something that doesn't belong to them is a thief. The first person to know what was going on was Tapiwa, a girl who was in the same class as Precious. Do you know what? She whispered to Precious one afternoon as they walked home after school. No, said Precious. What? There must be a thief at our school, Tapiwa said, looking over her shoulder in case anyone had heard what she said. I brought a piece of cake with me to school this morning. I left it in my bag in the hallway outside the classroom. She paused. I was really looking forward to eating that cake at break time. Have you ever had that experience? Have you ever thought to yourself, I have something so delicious for my snack or for my lunch and I just can't wait to eat it. And you really look forward to it. Just a little treat at a break time, right? At recess time? Snack time? She paused. I love cake, Precious said. She closed her eyes and she thought of the cake she enjoyed. Can you do that? Can you close your eyes and imagine some cake that you really like or something else you like to eat? Cakes with thick icing, cakes with jam on the top, cakes sprinkled with sugar and dipped in little colored sugar balls. There were so many cakes, and all of them were delicious. Well, somebody took my cake, complained Tapiwa. I had it wrapped in a small piece of paper, and when it was gone, it was gone, and I found the paper lying on the floor. Precious frowned. Gone? Eaten up, said Tapiwa. There were crumbs on the floor and little bits of icing. I picked them up and I tasted them. I could tell from the crumbs that it was my cake. Did you tell the teacher? Precious asked. Her friend sighed. yes, she said, but I don't think she believed me. She said, are you sure you didn't forget and already ate it? She said that sometimes that happened. People ate a piece of cake and then forgot that they had done so. Precious looked at Tepewa. Was she the sort of person to eat a piece of cake and forget all about it? Precious did not think so. It was stolen, Tepewa said. That's what happened. There's a thief in our school. Who do you think it is? I don't know, Precious said. She found it hard to imagine that any member of her class would do something like that. Everyone seemed so honest. And yet, when you came to think about it, if there were grown-up thieves, they had to have been children once, and perhaps they were already thieves when they were young. Or did people only become thieves later on? It's a very interesting question. She would have to think about it a little bit more, which is what she did as she walked home that day under the high, hot African sun. Remember, she lives in the country of Botswana, in the southern part of Africa. She thought about thieves, and she thought about what a detective would do. Does that look like your way home from school? Do you walk under a tall tree like that, with a monkey sitting in it, and high hills off in the background? That's not how I walk home. Very interesting to see how other people live. Chapter 4. Precious might easily have forgotten all about it. After all, it was only a piece of cake. But the next day, it happened again. This time, it was a piece of bread that was stolen, but not an ordinary piece of bread. This one was covered in delicious strawberry jam. You can lose a plain piece of bread and not really think twice about it. But when you lose one that is thickly spread with strawberry jam, now that's another matter altogether. The owner of this piece of bread with the jam was a boy called Seppo. Everybody liked this boy because he had a habit of saying funny things. If somebody can say something funny, then that often makes everybody feel happy. There's a picture of Seppo making people happy by making them laugh. If you saw such a piece of bread sitting on a plate, your mouth would surely begin to water. And yes, you might imagine how delicious it would taste. But would you really eat it if you knew it belonged to someone else? Of course not. Well, it happened at lunchtime. Every day at 12 o'clock precisely, the school cook, a very large lady called Big Mrs. Molipi, Big Mrs. Molipi would bang a saucepan with a ladle. A saucepan is a big pot that you might cook something in, and a ladle is a big metal spoon to scoop it out with. This was the signal for all the children to sit down on the porch and wait to be given a plate of food that she cooked with her assistant, who was also her cousin. That sounds like an interesting thing to have someone who cooks your food at school and serves it to you. The assistant was not so big Mrs. Molipi, and as the name tells us, she was much smaller than the chief cook herself. "Time for lunch," Mrs. Molipi would call in a very loud voice. Then, not so big Mrs. Molipi would shout in a much smaller voice that was a lot squeakier. "Time for lunch!" Big Mrs. Molipi's food was all right, but just all right. It was, in fact, a little bit boring, since she only had one recipe, which was a sort of paste made out of corn and served with green peas and mashed turnips. Would you like that for your lunch? A paste made out of corn with green peas and mashed turnips? Maybe you would. I've never tasted it. Don't forget, don't yuck somebody's yum just because it doesn't sound good to you. Don't say yuck. Just say, I never tried that before. "It's very healthy," said big Mrs. Molipi, "so stop complaining, children, and eat up." "Yes," said not so big Mrs. Molipi. "Stop complaining, children, and eat up." Not so big Mrs. Molipi did not say anything other than what she heard her larger cousin say. She thought it was safer that way. If you said anything new, she imagined, then people would look at you. And not so big, Mrs. Molipi did not like the thought of people looking at her. It was no surprise that many of the children liked to make lunch a little more interesting by bringing some of their own food. So this is funny. This is a place where all the kids are served lunch at school, and they all eat the same thing, but they also can bring something else. Some brought a little bit of fruit, or a sugar donut, or maybe a cookie. Then after lunch, when they all had a bit of free time before going back into the classroom, they would eat their special treats. And there are the two cooks, the two Mrs. Molipis, and this says, dinner time, dinner time. It's funny, sometimes people call lunch dinner, and they call the meal in the evening supper. My grandparents were like that. There are different names for meals. It's interesting. Seppo had brought his piece of bread and jam in a brown paper bag. While big Mrs. Molipi had served lunch, he had left the bag in the classroom, tucked away safely under his desk. He was sure that this is where he left it, so when he went back in and saw that it had disappeared, he was very surprised indeed. "My bread!" he wailed. "Someone has taken my bread!" Precious was walking past the open door of the classroom when she heard this. She looked in, and there was Seppo, standing miserably beside his desk. "Are you sure?" Precious asked. "Of course I'm sure," said Seppo. "It was here when we went for lunch, and now it isn't, and I didn't take it." There he is, looking by his desk, and he doesn't see his bread with jam. Precious walked into the classroom and stared at the spot that Seppo pointed at. There was certainly nothing there. "I'll ask people if they saw anything," she said, thinking that she might have found her first case as a detective. "In the meantime, you can have half of my biscuit. I hope it'll make you feel better." A biscuit is a British word for a cookie. So sometimes in Africa, where there were a lot of British people at one time, they call cookies biscuits. It did make him feel better. Seppo was still quite upset, but not quite as upset as he had been when he made the discovery. "What do you think happened?" Precious asked. "I don't know. I don't know either. It's mysterious," she said, and she thought about how fun mysteries really were. "There must be a thief in our school," Seppo said, as they walked to the playground. "Who do you think it is, Precious?" Precious shrugged. Oh my goodness, that's kind of a tongue twister. You say that. Precious shrugged. Precious shrugged. "I don't know," she said. "It could be," she paused. "It really could be anyone." "I think I may know who it is," he said. He didn't speak very loudly, even though there was no one else around. Precious asked, "Well, how do you know? Did you see someone take it?" Seppo looked over his shoulder. "No," he said. "I didn't see anyone actually take it, but I did see someone walking away from our classroom door." Precious held her breath, waiting for Seppo to say more. He was silent, though, and so she whispered to him, Who did you see?" Seppo did not say anything, but after hesitating for a moment or two, he very carefully pointed to someone standing on the playground. "Him," he whispered. "It's him. I saw him." So there's Seppo and Precious. And that's the boy that Seppo saw walking past the classroom. Now, do you think that because Seppo saw him walking past the classroom, that he's the one that took the bread with jam? How do you know? It could be, but maybe he was just walking past the classroom. Do you think that's enough evidence that he's walking past the classroom to say that he's the one that did it? I think we might need to know a little bit more, don't you? That's the end of chapter 4. So I want you to think about that. I wonder if it is that guy? Or I wonder if we just don't know yet. Stay tuned and we'll read more later.